In the summer of 1876, the Great Sioux War reached its most infamous chapter, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, known across America as Custer's Last Stand. This two-day clash pitted the United States 7th Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, against a united force of Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. It was a battle that would claim the lives of over 200 cavalrymen and etch itself into the nation's memory as both a tragedy and a turning point. Among those who rode that day were not only soldiers but also native scouts, men recruited for their tracking skills, their knowledge of the land, and their ability to read the signs of war. One of them was young Hawk, a young Arikara scout whose sharp eyes and restless spirit placed him at the heart of the unfolding storm. Alongside his father, Forked Horn, and a band of fellow scouts, Bloody Knife, Goose, Bobtailed Bull, White Swan, and others, he rode ahead of Custer's columns often, the first to glimpse the movements of their Lakota and Cheyenne foes. Young Hawk's account of that fateful battle is rare, for few from his position survived to tell their story. His words preserved in interviews and recollections paint a portrait not of glory, but of chaos, fear, and relentless survival. He saw the first signs of death, the first shots fired, and the desperate retreat that shattered Reno's command before Custer himself was overwhelmed. What follows is his story not in the voice of history books or military reports, but as he remembered it through the eyes of a man who lived the day the prairie turned red. Before we continue, like, share, and subscribe to help our community grow. Now, let's dive in. The sun had not yet climbed high over the plains when I tightened the strap of my saddle and looked across the rolling land ahead. The air was cool that morning, but it carried a weight I could not shake. We had ridden far with the soldiers, white men with blue coats and restless eyes, and now the scouts were gathered waiting for the next command. I was young then, though not new to war. My name is Young Hawk, son of Forked Horn, and like my brothers of the Arikara, I had agreed to ride as a scout for the 7th Cavalry. We were told the Sioux had gathered in great numbers along the greasy grass. The Little Bighorn and that Custer would strike them hard and fast. Some among us believed this would be like other raids, quick, fierce, and soon over. But as the sun rose, my heart told me different. Around me, the camp stirred with uneasy life. Horses shifted and snorted. The soldiers cleaned their weapons and murmuring to each other in words I half understood. Bloody Knife, proud and fierce, stood apart, his bright sash marking him as one the soldiers listened to. Goose laughed quietly, with Big Belly trying to shake the tension from their bones. Bobtailed Bull rode near me, his rifle already loaded. White Swan, ever watchful, ran his fingers over the feathers in his hair. I remember my father's face that morning. Forked Horn was older, his hair streaked with gray, yet his eyes were sharp as ever. He said little, only that we must keep close and ride fast when the call came. The land was too still, he warned. The Sioux were out there waiting and watching. Not long after a rider approached, the message was clear. The chief wanted us to move. We were to ride ahead, follow the river, and cut the trail. The soldiers would come behind. I gripped my reins and felt the leather bite against my palm. The battle had not yet begun, but already the world seemed to hold its breath. As we set off, the wind carried the smell of dust and river grass. Each hoofbeat felt louder than it should have. I remember thinking of the stories the old men told, how a lone teepee on the prairie could mean many things, warning, sickness, or death left behind. That morning as we rode, I wondered which we would find. The river curved ahead of us like a dark ribbon, its banks lined with willows and low brush. The air was still cool, but the sun was climbing now, spilling long fingers of light across the grasslands. We rode in a loose line, the scouts stretching out before the soldiers who followed far behind. Each of us searched the horizon for any sign of movement, dust, smoke, a flash of steel. It was then that we saw it, a lone teepee standing in the distance, white against the green of the valley dot. It stood quiet, unmoving like a sentinel on the prairie. At first we thought perhaps it was abandoned shelter left behind by a fleeing family. But as we drew nearer, the air around it seemed heavy, like a place where the wind itself held its breath. The order came down the line, go forward, see what lies within. Bloody Knife nodded to us, and I rode with Goose, Bobtailed Bull, and 2 others. My horse stepped carefully over the uneven ground, its ears twitching as though it sensed what we could not yet see. The teepee's poles leaned slightly, the hide flaps rustling faintly in the breeze. There was no fire, no tethered ponies, no sign of life. Be ready, Bloody Knife warned. His hand tightened on the reins, his rifle angled across his lap. Sometimes the dead are left as a message. We dismounted a few paces away. The earth smelled of trampled grass and damp river soil. I drew my knife, the blade catching the morning light, and together we moved closer. The teepee's entrance was tied shut. I remember the silence then, how the soldiers behind us stopped speaking, how even the birds seemed to pause in their song. I felt the weight of the knife in my hand and the beating of my heart in my ears. With a sharp pull, bobtailed bull slit the hide. The sound of tearing fabric was loud as a shout. The flap fell open, and the smell hit us first. The heavy, sour breath of death. Inside, on a scaffold raised from the ground, lay a body wrapped in robes. The flesh was gray, the hair matted, the eyes closed, as though in restless sleep. Offerings were scattered at its feet, a pipe, a painted shield, a few small bundles tied with rawhide. Flies buzzed in the stale air. For a moment, none of us spoke. We had seen death before, but this felt different, like a warning left on the trail ahead. Bloody Knife stepped forward, his face set hard. "They left this for us to find," he said quietly. "A sign that their dead walk with them." I felt a chill run down my spine. The Sioux were near, closer than we had thought. We backed away, leaving the teepee standing as we had found it, the torn flap now swaying in the morning wind. As we mounted our horses, the call came from behind. The soldiers were moving up, and Custer wanted us to ride ahead again. I looked back once at the lonely structure fading behind us. The prairie stretched wide and empty, but I knew then that we were not alone. The battle was coming. The land itself seemed to whisper it. The grass bent gently with the breeze hiding the river's glimmer until we drew close. I had been riding since first light with the other Arikara scouts, our eyes sweeping the bends of the Little Bighorn. The order to advance came like the snap of a whip. We scouts pushed forward, the river curling at our flank, the grass whispering under the weight of our horses. Behind us, the blue-coated soldiers of Major Reno's column began to form their line, their sabers clinking, their faces taut with a readiness I did not trust. Farther still, Custer's own command wheeled to the north, his figure small on the horizon, moving fast, too fast. We had been told by Custer himself that the Sioux and Cheyenne would not stand and fight, that they would scatter at the sight of the soldiers. The valley was no longer silent. Somewhere ahead a dog barked, a child cried. Then the unmistakable echo of a war whoop cracked through the air like a hawk's scream. Dust rose on the far bank. The Sioux were here. I remember the first shots, sharp, dry cracks that split the stillness. The sound rolled across the grass like a gust of hot wind, and with it came the answering cries of warriors hidden in the brush. Arrows hissed past us, one thudding into the ground near my horse's hooves. The animal shied, and I pulled it hard, feeling its muscles twitch with fear. Bloody Knife was ahead, his rifle raised, his sash bright even in the dim light. Goose rode close behind me, his face set in a grim line. Bobtailed Bull shouted something, words lost in the sudden storm of noise as the first of Reno's men fired their carbines in ragged reply. I gripped my reins tighter, my fingers stiff with the need to do something, shoot, ride, or run. I could not yet tell which. Smoke began to drift across the river valley, thin at first, then thicker as more rifles spoke. Horses screamed a sound like men in pain. The air filled with the sharp stink of powder and trampled grass. But as I looked ahead, I saw no sign of fear among them. Smoke curled from many lodges, far more than the officers had claimed there would be. The village stretched like a great snake along the riverbank, hundreds, maybe thousands of lodges. My stomach tightened. Major Reno had already driven his men into the attack, their sabers flashing and their carbines ready. We scouts rode a little ahead, ordered to flush out any stragglers or warn of ambush. But what we saw was not an ambush. It was a storm gathering. From the village the warriors came. Through the haze I saw them, not a few, not a band of frightened men running, but a flood of Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho riders breaking from the cottonwoods, their ponies leaping the low banks, their faces painted in red and black. They came with rifles, with bows, and with lances that glinted like the teeth of a wolf. Their war cries rose above the pounding of hooves, and the air trembled with their fury. They moved with a speed the soldiers could not match, circling, darting, loosing arrows that found their marks. One fell near me, little brave, his cry torn away by the wind as he clutched at a wound in his side. I wanted to stop to reach for him, but a bullet tore the bark from a tree near my head, and instinct drove me onward. It was no longer a charge. It was a storm. I remember the heat of it, the way the world narrowed to the pounding of my horse's hooves, and the taste of smoke on my tongue. I remember the wild eyes of the men around me, soldier and scout alike, each fighting his own battle, each looking for a gap, a way through the wall of dust and death closing in. And above it all, I remember the feeling in my chest, not just fear, but a heavy knowing that this valley would drink deeply of blood before the sun set. I felt my heart quicken, each beat a drum in my ears. I shouted to the others, "Pull back! Too many! Too many!" We turned our ponies toward the timber along the river, but the firing had already begun in earnest. The soldiers dismounted, forming a skirmish line. I saw them raise their carbines, heard the sharp, fast reports followed by the heavier booms of return fire. Smoke drifted low and bitter, stinging my eyes. A trooper beside me, a young man with a pale beard, fumbled with his cartridge belt. His hands shook. I saw him glance at me as though I, a scout, could give him courage, but I had none to give. I was no soldier sworn to die in that field. I was there to see, to guide, to survive. The first men fell before the line was even set. Horses screamed, the smell of powder and sweat thick in the air. I saw a riderless mount bolt past, blood slick along its flank. Reno shouted something I could not hear over the gunfire, something orders, curses I could not tell. His line wavered, then surged again, a tide of men firing blind into the dust. I saw Isaiah Dorman, the interpreter, firing from the timber's edge, his voice rising in warning. The Sioux pressed harder, men ran into the river, some clutching wounds, some already dead. I wheeled my pony and spurred him hard toward the cover of the trees. Branches whipped against my face, tearing at my shirt, but I did not slow. Behind me, the valley was a storm of dust and death, and I knew in that moment this was no easy battle. This was the beginning of a disaster. I had barely reached the edge of the timber when the valley behind me erupted into madness. The line of soldiers that Reno had set was already wavering. I turned in my saddle just in time to see their formation buckle under the force of the charge. The warriors came in waves, painted faces fierce with rage, their ponies leaping the riverbanks like spirits loosed from the earth itself. "Hold the line! Hold the line!" someone shouted, but their voices were swallowed by the thunder of hooves and the crack of rifles. Then I saw him, Bloody Knife, our chief among the scouts, the man who had guided us through many trails before. He stood beside Major Reno, shouting, pointing, his face tight with anger. He had warned them. We had all warned them. There were too many lodges, too many warriors gathered here, and now our words were proven true. A shot rang out louder, closer, and I saw the bullet struck him. Bloody Knife in the head. His body crumpled, and the blood of a proud scout splattered across Reno's face and coat. For a heartbeat, everything seemed to stop. Reno staggered, his expression frozen with shock, and in that moment, the line broke. Men began to run, not in order, not in retreat, but in panic. Some dropped their rifles. Others stumbled into the river, their gear dragging them under the current. Horses bolted, riderless, their reins slapping against their sides. The air was thick with screams, men calling for their officers, for their mothers, for God himself. I gripped my reins and shouted to the others, "Into the woods! This way!" We Arikara had no reason to die in that open killing ground. Our job was to scout, to guide, not to stand and be swallowed by a tide we had already seen coming. I ducked low as bullets hissed past splintering branches overhead. The timber was a tangle of cottonwoods and brush thick enough to hide a man if he kept still. We urged our ponies through, the smell of sap and gunpowder mingling in my nose. A soldier stumbled near me, blood running from a gash in his arm. He grabbed at my stirrup, begging for help. I pulled him up behind me, though the weight made my pony stagger. He was heavy with fear, his breath ragged against my neck. The valley was now a roaring beast. I heard the Sioux and Cheyenne shouting to one another, their voices rising like the howl of the wind. Arrows hissed into the trees. The sound of splashing water told me more soldiers were trying to cross the river, but many would never make the far bank. When I reached the edge of the timber on the bluff side, I turned once more. Smoke rolled across the grass, blotting out the sky. I could see Reno's men in pieces, some huddled behind fallen logs, others fleeing for the hills. The proud line that had ridden in so boldly was gone. That was the moment I knew the valley was lost. We were not fighting a handful of warriors. We were standing in the heart of a nation. When we finally broke free from the timber, our ponies scrambling up the bluffs, the river valley opened wide behind us like a wound. Smoke coiled in the air, and the cries of the warriors carried up the slopes. I stopped at the crest, chest heaving, and looked back. The soldiers who had escaped the timber with Reno were a ragged, bloodied line. Some had lost their hats, others their rifles. Many stumbled as they climbed, eyes wide and wild like hunted deer. I saw the fear in them, the disbelief. They had ridden down there thinking to strike a blow, but now they fled, their discipline scattered like chaff on the wind. I turned my gaze north along the twisting river. There, farther up where the bend snaked toward the larger encampment, I caught sight of Custer's column, 5 companies riding hard, dust trailing their advance. They had not heard what we had seen. They had not felt the valley buckling beneath the weight of so many warriors. Some of the scouts near me spoke in Arikara, their voices low and bitter. "He splits the command," one muttered. "Reno broken here, and Custer rides deeper still. There is no one to join him now." I said nothing, but in my chest a coldness settled. We had warned them. We told them the village was too strong, the enemy too many, but their ears were closed by pride, their eyes blinded by the promise of victory. The wind shifted, then carrying with it the sound of distant drums, faint but insistent. The village was alive, and its warriors were mounting. Through the haze, I could see them swarming like ants across the low ground, some turning toward Reno's bluffs, others racing north to meet Custer. Major Reno barked orders, though his voice cracked with strain. He wanted the men to dig in on the heights to form what line they could. The ground was dry and hard, scattered with sage and rock. Not much for defense, but better than the valley floor we had fled. I remember the faces of the other Arikara scouts. Some argued to stay to keep our duty. Others urged retreat, saying this was no fight for us to win. We were guides, not soldiers sworn to this regiment's death. I kept my eyes on the northern trail where Custer rode, and a knot tightened in my throat. The dust of his column faded into the distance, swallowed by the bends of the river and the gathering storm of warriors. The sky was still bright then, but in my heart I felt the shadow of what was coming. From the high bluffs we could hear the valley below like a living thing. Its sounds carried on the wind, rising and falling with the chaos of battle. The gunfire to the north had begun as a series of quick, sharp volleys far away, but steady. It was Custer. I knew his column had made contact. At first I thought they might still force the village to scatter, that their charge would pierce the lodges and send the women and children fleeing, but the sound of their rifles did not draw the enemy away. It only roused them further. From the ridges around us I saw bands of warriors racing north, their ponies fast as antelope, dust rising in long trails behind them. There were too many. For every group that fell back toward Reno's bluffs, 2 more seemed to stream upriver to meet Custer. We scouts were ordered to stay where we were to guard the flank and keep watch. Some of the soldiers muttered about going to Custer's aid, but the officers barked them into silence. The enemy was between us now. The valley was theirs. As the sun climbed higher, the noise from the north thickened more rifles. The rolling echo of volleys, then a strange pulsing sound. Singing, at first faint, then louder, carried on the wind like a low chant. The Lakota and Cheyenne were calling to one another, their voices rising in what I would later hear called the death song. It was not a song of mourning, not yet. It was a song of victory and killing. I lay on my belly near the bluff's edge, my carbine ready but unused, and watched the river bend where dust swirled in great yellow columns. I could not see the men clearly, only flashes of blue coats, the glint of steel, the bobbing of guidons in the sunlight, but the shape of the fight was plain. Custer had been cut off. "Do you hear them?" one of the scouts whispered. He was older than me, his face drawn with fear. "They have him surrounded. They will dance him to death." I said nothing. My mouth was dry. The truth was there in the wind. The war cries rose and fell. The shots grew fewer, and the chant carried on stronger and wilder. The warriors had him in their grip now, and no trail led out. Around me, the Arikara scouts shifted uneasily. Some wanted to ride for the timber and find a way out of this cursed place. Others still hoped for an order. Some planned from the officers to break through. But no such order came. Reno was holding his ground, digging shallow rifle pits, pacing, like a man haunted by the ghost of the valley he had fled. I thought of the warnings we had given, the signs we had seen, the lone teepee by the trail, the endless lodges strung along the river, the restless stirrings in the enemy camp all ignored. And now, as the sun burned overhead, the noose was tightening. We were listening to the death dance of men we would never see alive again. The afternoon sun was beginning to fall, but its heat still pressed on us like a heavy hand. My legs ached from the long ride, my mouth dry as the earth beneath our horses' hooves. We Arikara scouts had regrouped on the bluffs looking across the broken land where the Little Bighorn wound its way through the valley. The dust clouds ahead marked where Custer had gone and where he was now in desperate peril. I will never forget the sound that carried to us first, the faint but unmistakable crack of carbines. Scattered panic no longer, the steady volleys of a line holding ground, but the desperate popping of men firing where they stood and surrounded. We could not see them all at once, only glimpses through the shimmering haze, but word passed quickly among us. Custer was cut off. Bloody Knife was gone. Many of our Lakota and Cheyenne enemies, flushed with their victory over Reno, now turned their fury toward Custer's 5 companies. We Arikara scouts knew our orders were not to fight pitched battles. We were eyes, ears, shadows meant to see and live to tell what we saw, yet it is a hard thing to watch men ride to their death and not be able to pull them back. From our vantage, I saw Custer's line break apart. They had tried to form along the ridges. Keogh's men to the south, Yates and Custer himself, pushing north toward what they thought was a better position. But the warriors swarmed them like ants over dry grass. The smoke rose from the river crossings where earlier skirmishes had flared, and now that same smoke curled toward the ridges where the last stand was forming. I remember seeing through my spyglass a small group of troopers making a desperate ride toward the river. Perhaps to break through, perhaps to find water. They never made it. A mass of horsemen closed them and their ponies, leaping over the broken ground with terrifying speed. The guns flashed, the dust leapt up, and then there was only stillness where they had been. The hill that would forever bear the name of Custer's last stand was not much of a hill at all, just a bare rise dotted with sage and stone. From the distance we watched as the survivors clustered there, their horses bunched tight for cover, their carbines flashing in frantic defense. Custer himself, I cannot say. I saw his face, only a figure in a buckskin coat rallying the men, waving his pistol toward the high ground. The warriors did not rush in all at once. They moved like a tide, surging forward, falling back, creeping closer each time. Shots cracked from the draw, arrows arced high and fell among the soldiers. I saw some troopers drop their reins and run for the rocks only to be cut down before they made 10 paces. Others knelt beside their fallen horses, using the carcasses for cover as the ring grew tighter. A strange quiet came before the end. It was not silence. There was still gunfire, still the terrible cries of the Sioux and Cheyenne, still the beating of hooves, but in my chest I felt it, the moment when hope breaks. The line wavered, men bunched too close, their firing wild. Then the last charge came a rush from all sides. Dust swallowed the hill. The flashes became one continuous roar. I gripped my carbine but did not fire. What would one more bullet do? We scouts kept our distance, unwilling to ride into that storm of death. It was over in minutes, though it felt far longer. When the dust cleared, the hill lay still. Horses stumbled, riderless. Figures in blue lay scattered, some still twitching, most unmoving. The white banner of Custer's command, once bright in the morning sun, was nowhere to be seen. That was the moment I knew. The heart of the 7th Cavalry had been torn out. The man they called Yellow Hair, who had ridden so bold into this valley, now lay among his men. And I, young hawk of the Arikara, could only watch, bearing the weight of what my eyes would never forget. When the last shots faded, a heavy stillness settled over the valley, a stillness that was not peace but exhaustion. The sun had sunk lower, casting long shadows across the broken ridges and the dry, trampled grass. I sat my horse on the bluffs with the other Arikara scouts, staring down at the hill where Custer and his men had made their stand. Smoke curled up in lazy columns, mingling with the dust that still hung in the air. The cries of the warriors carried faintly, some triumphant, some mournful for their own dead, lay among the grass as well. From this distance I could see the scattered bodies of troopers, their blue coats stark against the earth, their horses lying twisted beside them. It was a sight that seared itself into my mind, a battlefield silent except for the crows already circling above. We scouts spoke little. Each of us knew that we had just witnessed the breaking of the heart of the 7th Cavalry. The man they called Yellow Hair, Custer, was gone. So were Yates, Keogh, Calhoun, and scores of men who had ridden with them that morning, full of confidence and song. Now they lay in stillness, and the valley belonged to the Lakota and Cheyenne. My hands trembled as I wiped the dust from my face. I was no stranger to battle, but this felt different, bigger, heavier. We had come here as scouts meant to guide, to warn, to read the land, yet I wondered, had our warnings gone unheard? Had we led these men into a storm they could not escape? As the evening deepened, the warriors began to strip the field. I saw them move among the fallen, taking rifles, ammunitions, even boots. Some counted coup, striking the dead with sticks to honor their bravery. Others lifted their scalps high and cried to the sky. I did not move closer. It was not our place to interfere. We had been told to observe, not to fall to the same fate. The smell came next. The bitter mix of gunpowder, sweat, blood, and the dry sage, crushed under hooves. It clung to the wind and followed us as we shifted our position further back along the ridge, wary of being caught in the same tide that had swallowed Custer's command. Reno and Benteen we knew were still somewhere behind us, holding their own lines on the bluffs. The sound of their carbines had long faded, replaced by the distant drumming from the village. Night was coming, and with it the uncertainty of what the next dawn would bring. I remember turning my horse for one last look before the darkness swallowed the valley. The hill was dotted now with figures moving like shadows. Some raised their arms to the sky. Others rode off with trophies, and some simply sat as if even they could not yet grasp the weight of what had happened. That night, I carried with me the memory of that hill not only as a place of defeat, but as a warning written in blood across the land. The 7th Cavalry had ridden in with drums and flags, sure of their strength. Now they were dust upon the prairie, and I, young hawk, was left to tell what the earth would remember. Toward midnight, a red glow began to rise from the north. At first I thought it was the moon caught in the dust, but then the smell reached us. Burning flesh, hair, and hide. The warriors had set fires among the fallen, some to cleanse the field, others to desecrate their enemies, and perhaps also to drive away the sickness that follows such slaughter. I saw the glow flicker along the hills where Custer had made his stand. It was as if the earth itself had opened to swallow their memory.